Someone told me not so long ago that the word that we should use with Greta and the movement that she's launched is hope. She's talking about hope. Hope that finally the topic of climate solutions, circular economy is now. Not in 20 years, not in 30 years, not in 50 years. It's happening right now. My name is JC, as Pascal said, and I have to say I live across the street, so I do believe among all of us, I may be the one who has the least carbon footprint to reach that place. I would like to start with you, Farah, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I would like to know what your job is all about. You're a policy advisor on the Strategic Initiatives team for New York City Mayor's Office. What do you do?
That's a big question. So the Mayor's Office of Sustainability is tasked with reducing the city's greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a few different ways that we do that, and of course we don't do it alone, but specifically within the Office of Sustainability, we have multiple teams. So we have a buildings team, a transportation team, an energy and infrastructure team, of course a communications team, and all of these are integral parts or integral components to how we work to solving the problem. My team is newly formed. We're about 2.5 years old, the Strategic Initiatives team, and we kind of work across all of those sectors, and we work to fill those gaps and also work on some of the more hard-hitting components of some of these things. So, for example, when you look at buildings, very important, but there's sort of a longer timeline, and there's a very technical component to sort of how that works. And so that's why there's a team dedicated to that. My portfolio specifically focuses on a few different things, but the main one within it is looking at waste. And when I inherited the portfolio, a lot of it was definitely centered around how the city manages waste and the different components of what that looks like. But it became very quickly evident that a focus on circular economy was going to be something that is not just beneficial to us now, but a much longer term investment that would help us with so many of the issues that we're seeing today with how a lot of these things run. So my job is primarily working with agencies on city level implementation and public-private partnerships to really help kind of paint a picture about what a circular economy can look like in New York City. And there's so many different components of that, whether that's looking at the circular economy around food or textiles or electronics or plastics and packaging, which is a big one that we're working on right now, and so many other pieces to that. And so it's really focusing on looking at how those things, how there can be, I mean, it's a policy shop, the mayor's office, so how we can create policy while also working with partners to really drive a lot of that work forward to ultimately reduce our carbon emissions.
Are we talking in New York City or at the state level about legislation on circular economy at this moment?
Yes, so we are. Depending on which component of circularity you're looking at, there's different conversations happening. When it comes to extended producer responsibility and EPR, the city's doing a lot of work on that, but there's also a lot happening at the state level, so the city's working to support the state on that and is prepared to kind of provide that support. Ideally, a lot of the legislation is coming at the highest level it can so that it's easier for manufacturers and so that it's happening more widely, but there's quite a few sort of levers within circularity that are happening at the city level as well.
And to you, Frédéric, you were one of the negotiators at the COP21, and France is working on a big piece of legislation at the moment. Could you share with us what it entails and what is the context of our conversation when it comes to a national legislation?
Sure. Thank you very much. And I think one first starting point is what I want to emphasize is that circular economy is extremely wide, right? It can cover many sectors, many topics. So many actors, companies, and things have a stake in there. And also, it's very wide in terms of the kind of thing you need to do or to change, right? It was a very good slide and a very good presentation highlighting that it's not only about recycling, and I want to emphasize that it's far bigger than recycling, right? is France doing good on this? No, we're not. I mean, the good news, or the relatively good news, that nobody is really. We saw on the slide as well that some countries are doing pretty good on recycling, like Austria, Germany, or Taiwan. But that's pretty good is not good enough by far. And second, it's really only a small piece of the big puzzle. For instance, in France, every year, there are about 16 billion euros worth of food are wasted. So it's about $600 per household per year. 600 US dollar worth of food is wasted per family every year.
And it's 16 billion euros.
Yes, 16 billion euros. And you know, and the food waste is a problem for many reasons, but including on the resource side, because for instance, I learned while preparing the speech that in order to produce one baguette, right, you need one bathtub of water. So every time you throw a baguette in the bin because it's too dry, you haven't eaten it, you're throwing out one bathtub full of water. Every time you're throwing a pork, you know, a piece of pork you for dinner, or jeans, it's 70 bathtubs of water every time. You know, so see yourself throwing just in the river 70 bathtubs of water. On the textile industry in France every year, you know, France is a small country compared to the US, right? But in France every year, it's 10 to 20,000 tons of clothing are destroyed every year, right? Not sold and destroyed. Only 1/3 of the clothing are recycled and collected in France. Only 1/3 of the clothes sold and then collected, and out of that, a bit more than half is actually reported on the market somewhere. So I'm just want to say that we like everybody, we're pretty far from where we should be, because obviously it's an issue not only in terms of natural resources. We simply won't have eternally enough natural resources to tap on. It's an issue of environment, of course. We saw the pictures. The impact on environment, on climate, on all this linear industry is terrible. And it's also a question of social and economic impact, because frankly, it's ridiculously inefficient as an economic system to waste all these resources when so many people lack resources. So all that introduction to say, in France, maybe I want to mention 3 dates, trying to be very quick. In 2015, we had a big legislation on climate change and on green energy and things like that in 2015. And in there, we had a piece about planned obsolescence, which to me is something very important, because it's a bit the key of some economic sectors, right? Where companies sell you stuff which are designed to expire very quickly, because of course that's the interest of a company in a linear model. Their interest is to sell you another stuff quickly, mobile phone. So this famous case with printers, for office printers, which are designed to tell you, oh, my ink is empty, before it actually was. So you would buy new ink and put in there, and you would waste. And the whole thing was designed to trick the consumer. So we put in the law, and I think that's a premiere in France. We made it illegal, planned obsolescence illegal by law in 2015. Another big important piece of legislation was a pioneer legislation on food waste in 2016, whereby, for instance, supermarkets were forbidden to throw food when food which was unsold, and not allowed to throw it anymore. They had to find people, associations or other way to reuse the food or recycle it and, in different ways. But they had a legal and financial responsibility to take care of the food. It couldn't be thrown away. That's very important. But these are only 2 pieces. And in 2018, the government published a more exhaustive roadmap for circular economy. So last year, which was preparing a law. And right now, as it was said, we have a more exhaustive legislation, which has just been approved by the French Senate, and it will now be discussed at the French National Assembly. It's called Anti-Waste Law for Circular Economy. It targets, hopefully, all kind of sector, all kind of things to target. It introduced, for instance, an index of reparability, I'm not sure that's clear in English, is it? It means when you sell an electronic product, you have to tell the consumer to what extent that product can be repaired easily if there is a problem, or to what extent if there is a problem you have to throw it and buy another one. The responsibility of producers has been extended, including financial responsibility. When you sell something, you're responsible for its end of life as well. There was the destruction of unsold items, not only food, but textile and all others is forbidden, thing like that. And there was, and that's the last point I'm wanting to mention, there was several slides about that. There was a big piece about plastics in the legislation. Plastics is not necessarily at the heart of circular economy. I mean, if you ask my frank opinion, plastic is something that should be banned totally at some point. Obviously not today, but that's where we should aim at. And the law introduced many ambitious targets about that: 100% recycled plastic by 2025. One-usage plastics, single-use plastics. Many single-use plastic products like cutlery and straws and things will be banned from France in either 1 or 2 years. And there was a lot of legislation, and one piece that made many media, but what was in the law and what was rejected by the Senate, was the introduction of a deposit system for plastic bottles. The government wanted to introduce that to encourage people to bring back the plastic bottles they could recycle. But the French Senate actually considered that this was not good enough, because it was actually helping and encouraging the usage of plastic bottles. And where the ultimate goal should be to ban plastic bottles, so we shouldn't introduce legislation that are actually supporting Coca-Cola in selling more plastic bottles, provided that people would recycle them. And as we saw, recycling is not enough. So the Senate considered this kind of deposit system was too good for plastic producers, basically, so banned it.
You mentioned the idea of destroying clothes. There is a British brand called Burberry that destroyed in 2018 $40 million of clothes and accessories that they did not sell, instead of giving it away. There is a sport brand that in Paris a few weeks ago actually destroyed and left on the sidewalk hundreds, if not more, pairs of shoes that they were not going to sell. It was better for them to dispose them. You also shared some numbers about food waste. Here in the US, according to the FDA, 30 to 40%, there is 30 to 40% of food waste every year. It amounts to $160 billion. When it comes to textile, there are 25 billion pounds of textile wasted every year in the US. Only 15% of it has been recycled. So the first question, and I know we're talking about recycling or creating a circular economy. At Loop, at TerraCycle, you are, Myriam, working on new concepts, new ideas, so that we don't just use and throw away the packaging that we need for the food products that we buy, or for household products. Can you tell us more about the concept that you are actually developing?
Yeah, no, of course. And I work at TerraCycle. TerraCycle has been around for more than 15 years and is present in more than 20 countries in the world, where historically we've been finding and developing solutions for the hard-to-recycle streams. Our most iconic material that we recycle is cigarette butts, where we repurpose them and find a new life for that. We've been recycling the tubes of Colgate into playground for kids, or I like the example of the Coke that we just showed, but we also partner with Head & Shoulders to make their packaging out of ocean plastic, for example. But, our mission is to eliminate the idea of waste completely, and there's no waste if you don't create it in the first place. And I think this is from this idea, and also looking back at what we used to do. If you remember the milkman example, we're really going back to this world where the packaging was meant to be durable and reused. So Loop is a circular platform where you go online, you buy your everyday products. The big difference is that instead of being in this disposable, single-use, most of the time plastic, Now you can buy your Häagen-Dazs in a stainless steel container that is designed for you to reuse it, and when you're done with it, you return it, we clean it, I refill it, and put it back in circulation, so your pack can be used many, many, many times. So we announced this initiative at the World Economic Forum at Davos this year in partnership with some of the biggest manufacturers out there, P&G, Unilever, Nestle, Danone, but we also work with small startups. We want eventually to make this a mass model that we can, where we can offer a durable product instead of a disposable everywhere where we can. Right now it's a small scale initiative. We're learning from the consumers, learning from this adoption of a deposit, which here is meant as an incentive for you to return the packaging, so it's actually reused. And yeah, it's very exciting to share this as one of the initiatives that you can also play a part without sacrificing the product that you actually love and trust.
It does come at a cost, though. For the consumer to use a product like this, will have to pay a deposit fee per product. How does that work? I mean, it's not like, you know, I'm gonna use a product that can be recycled, and maybe I will recycle it or not. You are actually putting a system in place so that if I'm buying from you, I want to recycle that packaging, otherwise I'm gonna lose my money.
So the idea here is not recycle, is reuse. So we use the deposit system to incentivize you to return the packaging. So we are really against single use. As a consumer, you go on the platform and you would pay for the product price of your Häagen-Dazs, but also it comes at a deposit that is 100% refundable when you return the packaging, so that if you break it, lose it, then you lose the right to get your deposit back, which is the whole new concept we're bringing here. We're learning a lot right now, and it's been very exciting to see the consumer response. We actually launched in Paris area also for the French people in the room.
Circular economy. Denise, you've been with Saint-Gobain for 12 years, since 2007, if I'm correct, and you're head of sustainability in North America. But Saint-Gobain is a very old company, I guess, and it has not been always been looking towards circular economy. How old is Saint-Gobain?
Saint-Gobain is 354.
So it's a fairly old company. It's
Yes.
the oldest in Europe.
Yes.
It started with?
The Hall of Mirrors in the Palace of Versailles. So it was sort of incorporated by Louis XIV, and we've been in continuous operation in some way or another since 1665.
And very well known also because the pyramid of the
Yes.
Louvre is made of Saint-Gobain glass.
It is, as is the Oculus at
In New York City.
New York City. Yes.
And the acoustic at the Metropolitan Opera,
Yes.
I believe. Yet, you are in a sector that is a bit, as Pascal Richard was saying, really the bad guy in the room.
Yes,
I mean,
that's
40% of greenhouse gas emission is due to construction.
Yes,
So you're part of the problem.
we are.
Can you be part of the solution?
Absolutely. So, I mean, this is actually the reason why I work for Saint-Gobain. I mean, I came to Saint-Gobain 12 years ago because, to me, it was a manufacturer that, yes, they're part of the problem, as we've put it. 30%, depending on what statistics you look at, up to 40% of greenhouse gas emissions and energy, and around the same for waste. But there's no sector in which it's more part of our business model to be part of the solution. So if we want to get to a planet where we have, as we saw before, 10 billion people in it, we will have these mega cities between cities. We have to build and live differently than we do today. So a company like Saint-Gobain, it's in our best interest to do that, and it's in our sort of business model to do that in a more sustainable way, because honestly, it costs us less money. So I came to this company because I felt that my sort of interest in environmental issues lined up the best with what our product category is. So if we also we're the largest building products company in the world, but we also make everything from medical products to abrasives and sort of everything in between. And if you look at, so there was a business development group that was put together as part of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. You look at the 30 biggest business opportunities that will come about because of if we are to achieve the, sort of the goal of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, Saint-Gobain does business in every single one of those areas, from mobility to healthcare to the building sector. everything in between. So that's why I choose to work for this company on a day-to-day basis.
So basically, the idea is to be able to build a building tomorrow that you could one day, first of all, that is going to reduce the impact on the environment. And Saint-Gobain was among the 87. There are 87 corporations that a month ago at the UN did commit to a net zero carbon gas emission by 2050. And you're one of them, but there are others. Suez is one of them, and so on. But the idea is to build a building, and it's going to have the least impact on the environment, number one. Right. But then the day you will, at the end of its life, shell life, I would say, when you demolish it or you tear it apart, you're going to be able to recycle. You know exactly how you are going to recycle its elements?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I would say the solution for circularity in the building sector is not technical, right? It's more economic at the moment, and the development of sort of that reverse supply chain in order to be able to get those materials back to a manufacturing environment, to be able to make them into something to be sort of sustainable for that company. So sort of the triple bottom line approach to things. The other thing that I'll say about that, so you mentioned the operating energy of a building and reducing the operating energy of a building. If we plan to meet the goals of the Paris Climate Accords, we have to pay a lot more attention to the amount of energy that goes into the materials that go into buildings. If you look at the operating energy of buildings and CO2 associated with that out to 2050, the bigger piece of that pie is actually the amount of carbon that's gone into the materials that built the building. It's not that the operation of the building isn't important, because it very much is, but we have to pay a lot more attention to the materials that go into the things that we manufacture and how we manufacture those products. So that's why I say it's in our best interest as a manufacturer. We reduce energy, that has a direct impact on the amount of carbon in our products, which is also, in some of our products, something like insulation, we spend a lot of money on energy because we do things like melt sand and cook rock in these things. So if we can reduce that energy, we're reducing the cost of our product, which reduces it for the consumer, and also makes something that's reducing the embodied carbon of the product that goes into a building and is helping our customer.
Farah, I know it's not necessarily your center of interest, but New York City has magnificent old buildings and also less magnificent old buildings, and they are a big part of the pollution in this city. But I'm thinking about the Chrysler Building, the Empire State Building. Those buildings were not built to be sustainable. Is there a legislation, is there a desire in New York City to retrofit or to renovate those buildings so that they are joining, in some ways, at least, if not the circular economy, but at least some levels of sustainability? Or do we need to demolish them and build anew?
Your timing of the question is fantastic. Just this past year, we actually just passed the Climate Mobilization Act, and it was a suite of different legislations, and one of them is a legislation that requires any building over 2,500 square feet to reduce their carbon emissions by 80% by 2050. And the only they're not exceptions, but the only buildings that get to follow sort of a different set of constraints are affordable housing and hospitals. And even they have to do work on their buildings, but of course, because of the nature of the work that happens in those buildings, they get to take sort of a different path to get there. But with that being said, every building, including these historic and monumental buildings, can function. They can remain in the skyline. They can, keep being these amazing landmarks, but they do have to meet these standards as well. And I think that speaks a lot to you're speaking to just how profound it is, the historical context of a lot of these buildings, for them to be able to survive in the city and sort of move with the city and make those changes in how those buildings function, plays an essential role to how we can envision what the future will look like. If these big, massive, old buildings can make these changes, there's no reason why any other building can't, whether it's in New York or anywhere else. The idea is if you can do it here, you can do it anywhere, right?
Knowing that almost 70% of the world's population in 2050 will live in the urban centers where we live, the buildings are at the core of a conversation. Dennis, back to you. Is it more expensive, less expensive to build a new building, to renovate and retrofit an old one? Can we do both?
I would say we could. I would be happy with both, working for a building products company. But you know, what cities like New York are doing are super important, and I think part of that story is maintaining historic buildings. The biggest piece of carbon for buildings, especially in a city like this, a lot of steel and concrete, is the steel and concrete. So most of what you're doing to retrofit those buildings is to go in and replace things like things that have a lesser carbon footprint. So you're already sort of reducing. I mentioned that term, embodied carbon. So you're taking that biggest embodied carbon piece out. So from a carbon perspective, it's better to renovate an existing building and retrofit with more efficient materials, better insulation. You know, if there's glass, a lot of these buildings in the city have glass, glazing, all of these modern techniques. So the first is knowing which ones to focus on, and they've done that. A lot of cities have done these benchmark laws in order to be able to, you know, at least figure out which of the buildings are the biggest emitters, and then making good choices with the materials that you select to go into those buildings. You know, from a performance perspective, there's a lot of choices out there, but paying attention to, you know, the embodied carbon materials that go in there, because again, we need to pay a lot more attention to that to get to these 2050 goals.
Can we all change holistically as individuals, corporations, and states, or do we need a push from a legislative body? You were talking about legislation on renovation in New York City. We are talking about a piece of legislation in France. You've been working at the COP21 with, you've been a negotiator, which to me must be a really tough job. So you've heard a lot of things. Do we need a push from the governments?
Well, I'm a French civil servant, so you know, what do you expect? I'm going to say yes, the government has a very important role to play. Because I mean, as much as I think individual can change, and, you know, I mean, you know, in the last 10 years since I've had the chance, the luck to meet my wife, I've tremendously changed on this front, and I know I could tell all these funny stories when I go to a shop in New York, to Zabar, when I buy hummus, and I'm bringing them back the package in which they gave me hummus last week. And I bring them back and I say, I want hummus, but please put it back in the same packet. And they're like, oh, no, that's not possible. And we spend 10 minutes arguing about why it's not possible yet, and I eventually get my hummus.
Loop is coming to your rescue very soon.
But it's very difficult. Anyway. But yeah, so individual can change, and, you know, and education is key, and same for companies, and many companies are you know, making lots of efforts, voluntary commitments, initiatives, innovation. I mean, sometimes just because I see the business interest in the long run, sometimes it's also mixed with some genuine, you know, philanthropy kind of thinking. But I mean, we'll go nowhere as far as we should go without proper policies in place. And that's government. Depending on the country, it's national government, federal or local, or a mix of both. But I mean, you need government to settle the targets, the objective, to say, okay, this is the ambition, that's where it should be, not here, that's here. To put the bar, you need a regulation, you need, you know, it can be norms, labels, how to organize the sortage system. You need fiscal incentives, of course. I mean, things have to be for businesses to go somewhere. It has to be profitable, but you need also, and actually it's more important in many sectors, non-fiscal incentive, non-fiscal support and help to build the chains. You know, because it's something to have to use recyclable materials. It's another thing to have them actually recycled. And sometimes, you know, companies say, well, I've put recyclable material in my glass, you know, but will that glass be recycled? I don't know. And that's not, maybe the company did all they could. They put lots of recyclable stuff in there. Maybe it's 100% recyclable. It's actually 100% recycled. But will it be recycled? That depends on what New York City will do with the, you know, the recycling system and so on and so forth. So definitively, government, public authorities have a big role to play. Also, you know, public investment, also public procurement. You know, show by example. If you go to in a ministry in France, will you be served in plastic bottles, or will you have water in other type of containers? And of course, education, formation, schools, for private sector, it's hugely important for all this. So, yes.
Do you have to train your consumers for Loop?
I think, especially the French people in the room, you've probably seen there's a lot of bulk offerings and stores popping up, like the vrac, as we said in French, that are a great initiative for like refilling and really going out of this idea of waste packaging that is ending up in our streets, in our oceans, in our plates, everywhere, right? But the direction that Loop is taking is really to understand that we are creatures of convenience and that disposability brought a lot of great things for our society that we're not necessarily willing to sacrifice, or at least not at a mass scale. I'm not trying here. Loop is maybe not meant for the people here that are, bringing their own container for getting their hummus or going to getting those nuts in your own glass jar, but really making this experience as convenient as possible and mimicking the benefits of disposability is something that Loop is trying to do for you to not to have to change so many habits, but for us to bring you the products that you're already using in a durable format for them to be reused as many times as possible. So I think we need all these initiatives, the ones for the people that are really ready to change and reconsider, the things that they've done along the years. But I think for us to get to this mass adoption that we want, for it to be scaling, for it to be beneficial for the environment, as well as more economically viable, as he mentioned, there's definitely a financial component here for it to be sustained in the long term. We, want to mimic this and not lose convenience and really bring this that way to consumers.
Yeah. Just to kind of build off of, number one, the question of does it require like legislation or something like that? So, and to what you were mentioning about, educating the customer, there are studies that are done every year, these consumer studies that are done that ask people about do you want a quote unquote more sustainable product? And most people answer something like 90% of people answer yes to that question. But then they ask the next question is, what does sustainability mean to you? And they have no idea. So I think that there's room in sort of the public policy end of things to define what sustainability means, and that can mean different things in different industries. I think there are, to your point, I think there are some industries that are not going to move without some type of incentive system. So whether that's, in some cases, like for instance in the United States, where it's really inexpensive to throw something in a hole in the ground, where that's not going to move unless there's scarcity or some type of incentive system to make that work financially for customers. Companies like Waste Management, they've been under a lot of pressure recently about not taking glass back. Curbside recycling is going away. But you talk to people at Waste Management and they make no money off of that because there's nowhere for them to sell that material. So a company like TerraCycle will go out and find markets and sort of develop that reverse supply chain. I heard a report on the way here about how Unilever is now requiring up to 50% recycled content in the packaging that they use in their products. So they're creating that incentive so that someone can go set up a business that is actually financially viable at that point. You mentioned the building is LEED certified. So I'm on the United States Green Building Council LEED Materials and Resources Technical Advisory Group. So we're developing the next set of standards as to what LEED will be. And in that, we're putting in place incentives for manufacturers to do things like put programs in place to reduce energy and carbon, and that when you put those materials in a building, a project can actually get credit for using materials that have a lower impact. So those are the kind of things. I think, to me, it's a mix of government action, private action, NGO type of action through systems like LEED that kind of gets us there.
We were mentioning the change for consumers and how we have to train them. One, as you mentioned, Pascal, one of my friends and client who is a parent here creates ethical bags, sustainable fashion. And one of the questions I had for her name is Ingrid Bruat, one of the questions I had for her was, do people actually buy product because it is sustainable. I had this question for the head of sustainability for the president of Kering North America, who launched the sustainability program at Kering. And I did ask him a long time ago, do people go to Stella McCartney? And then Stella McCartney was part of the group Kering, because what she creates is sustainable. And the answer was clearly no. They were going there because they liked the product. Do we see a change in the way people behave and ask that the city, the products they use, the apartments or the workplace they live in are more sustainable and more, they produce less green gas emissions?
I mean, I would argue yes. I mean, and I think the proof in the pudding in that is what you're seeing on the investor side of things as well. I mean, money isn't flowing to unethical places. I think we're starting to figure out what is good from an environmental, social, governance perspective, and money is sort of flowing to those places. A company like Patagonia, their stuff is really expensive, but I would wager to bet that most people in this room probably have something from Patagonia. They have people that show up at their stores when they have a job opening. It's something like 800 job applications for every job opening that they have. So I would say that there absolutely is a move in that direction, and we're seeing it both financially and from a, I would say, customer, employee, sort of all-around engagement perspective.
From what I see, because my job is to manage a relationship with these brands, is that their consumers are demanding change, right? They are the companies that put the most single-use packaging out there. And so Loop is a fantastic opportunity for them to answer their consumers and also, in the way, give them something better. Those designs are beautiful. The ice cream is kept colder for longer outside of the freezer. Those are things you couldn't do also in the disposable world. So I think we're going to start seeing more and more benefits also brought by circular economy and new models that didn't exist that are actually enhancing our lives in a different way.
Farah, how do you engage the youth? How do you engage people in New York City to behave differently and to behave in the spirit of the circular economy?
There's a lot of different ways. So our communications team within our office actually, maybe just over a year now, launched a campaign called Bring It. Some of you might have heard of it. They started by working with Swell, which for those of you who don't know is a water bottle company, a reusable water bottle company, to provide high school students throughout New York City with free water bottles, only in exchange asking them to use it. And so part of that campaign was asking students or New Yorkers or anyone who was interested not just to bring the reusable item, but to bring themselves to the challenge. And so there are various sort of communications-based events and sort of tabling and kind of getting themselves in the room, but the bigger picture is not just around sort of the marketing of the campaign, but also in getting the youth in particular to see themselves as a part of the solution and thinking about how something as small as what you are drinking your water or tea or coffee or whatever out of is contributing either positively or negatively to the planet. And if we can think about our role in that when it comes to plastics in that way, we can do it when it comes to food, we can do it when it comes to our technology, we can do it when it comes to our clothes, and sort of taking it upon ourselves to see ourselves as a part of a larger ecosystem, as opposed to being thirsty, buying a water bottle, sometimes not even drinking all of it, and then just sending it to a landfill. So it's a lot of that kind of thinking that some of our campaigns are starting to focus a lot on.
Is circular economy going to improve our quality of life? And beyond, are we going to be happier people thanks to circular economy? Is it going to make us actually better human beings? Not just because we are going to protect the planet more, but because of the way we are going to live.
It kind of comes back to the original definition behind sustainability. I think recently sustainability has become synonymous with environmental or climate or planet sort of concerns, but the original idea behind sustainability is that in order for something to be sustainable, it sustains the planet, yes, but also the people, and there's also profit involved. So I think that if we are building out systems that do a better job of thinking of the planet, do a better job of thinking of the people on the planet, and of course everyone's thinking about profit, but if we find a better way to integrate those things, the end product is a sort of optimal, elevated quality of life. And that can look different in different ways. We're not just talking about better quality products like we see with the design of the loop containers, but it's also about the quality of the buildings that we live in, and it's the clothes that we wear, the materials that we interact with every day. And I personally like to think that it impacts how we are with each other when everything isn't so transactional and everything isn't so short-lived. We can think about the bigger picture and how everything is really interrelated. And so there's many levels to sort of how that suits us. And I think once we see ourselves as a part of that larger ecosystem, we start to think less about the sort of immediate gratification or the planned obsolescence or any of these sort of things that seem like a good idea just in the moment, maybe not even an hour from now, but just in the moment, and we can start to think more about what our role is in the sort of larger ecosystem.
So, happier.
Happier.
Frédéric, less t-shirts in the apartment, but happier?
Very much, I strongly believe. I very strongly believe it is the case. Of course, as a judgment, everybody will have a very personal judgment on whether the current societal model and economic model does make people happy or not. But there are some very interesting features about circular economy. One of them being it involves a lot developing sharing. Right, car sharing, apartment sharing, and really sharing of resources, reusage, transmission of stuff, basically. And I believe that's rather correlated with more social interaction, and social interaction for social beings as us, I think, means more happiness. And another very interesting feature is that there's a very strong thing about circularity, which is about territories and relocalization of activity in territories. And so there's this, by turning to a real circular economy, you will have to rethink the territories and how different actors in a given territory work together to share the local resources and thing. And that as well, I think, especially in a globalized world, which it's not my intention to deglobalize at all, but I think this finding again meaning and purpose and sense at a local level is definitely something that is bound to give people more happiness.
Happier again. Let me ask you a question, Miriam. Is my ice cream going to be better in your packaging?
Well, I think that right now there's definitely a waste crisis, and at TerraCycle and with Loop, we really don't believe in waste at all. So I think finding those opportunities to reverse some of the things that went so wrong in the way we've been, producing and wasting things is definitely going to make our quality of life better, or this waste that is not going to be produced is only something that can get better for us, but this is not a silver bullet. There's many, we discussed that circular economy, sustainability is complex because it touches so many different things right now, so I really encourage everyone, whether through your work, through your, acts every day, when I refuse this bag here, or things like that, there's so many things we could do to inspire each other and share the benefits that are brought by this new concept that I think can bring a lot of good things.
Does living in a sustainable building is going to make me happier?
Absolutely.
Why?
So I'll start by saying this. So I've seen the other side of things. Yeah, I grew up in the Pittsburgh area in the early 80s, and in a place where everybody worked in the steel industry. Everybody's dad either worked in the steel mill, worked in a coal mine, or drove a train back and forth between a steel mill and a coal mine. And then everybody's dad lost their job in 1984 because that industry was incredibly unsustainable, and which left 30 years of pollution and other bad things behind that it took to fill back in, and that was only in the sort of proper city of Pittsburgh. So that's not sustainable at all, and I know that there were a lot of miserable people around that. I see people, we sort of eat our own dog food. We just built a a brand new LEED Platinum building as our headquarters, moved from an older building. You know, we have access to the outside views of light, better air quality. You know, we're attracting new talent that cares very deeply about these things. So it makes me happier working in a building like that, going to a place like that, and it also brings in people that I want to work with on a day-to-day basis. So I would say absolutely, it is sustainable to work in a sustainable building and a sustainable environment.
Well, thank you so much. And enough with my questions. I'd like to open it up to you.
So one of the things that we're doing right now and we're working on strengthening is looking at what's called EPP, or environmentally preferable purchasing. And so the same way that as a consumer, every dollar you spend is a vote towards or against something, we're trying to back we're trying to live our values. And so what that means is, for example, just at a city level operation, when we go to make purchases, whether that is how the furniture in our offices or bigger purchases or everything down to like ordering things for the kitchens in our offices if we have them, there are it's a long list, but there are a list of corporations that have sustainable practices and have environmentally preferable practices. And there's, if those companies exist in a particular purchase that we're trying to make, those, even if they're a little bit more expensive, they take preference in how we make those purchases. So there's different ways to leverage that outside of city government, but to the extent that we can live our values, this is something that's important to us, and that's actually publicly available online, so that if there's anyone else outside of government who wants to use that list, they can do that.
Frederic, any incentives for more B Corps in France?
I must say I'm not familiar with the B certified concept, but I take it the question is how to incentivize more company to behave properly in terms of circular economy and environmental thing. And I think that one of the key way we're trying to do that in France is with this principle of extended producer responsibility. That's how you said it. And there's basically a bonus malus system for a company. So company first it was a limited number of sectors, and now this number of sectors has been extended, including to lastly to gardening stuff, tobacco, sports, diapers, and so many sectors. You get what I mean. The point is, of all these sectors, companies who sell things are responsible for the complete cycle of the thing. So either you create your own chain of collecting, recycling, reuse, anything like that. If you don't, you pay to an organism that will do it on your behalf, if you will, and you have incentive on depending on what you put in your product. When your product is more circular or not, when your product not only incorporates recycled elements, but also is designed in a way that make it easier to reuse at the end, repair, reuse, recycle, and so you have fiscal incentive. Basically, you will pay less if you sell that kind of product than if you sell, the old-fashioned kind of product, which is not easy to reuse, recycle, or repair. You will pay more. So we have this principle of that's in the law. Then we have all these organisms put in place to actually implement that. So I suppose I hope I answered more or less your question. That's the way we try to tackle it in France.
What about you, Denis? I mean, I said before, 87 corporations did sign that commitment to net zero carbon by 2050. That's nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously.
I guess what I'd say, B Corp is, it's a legal framework under which you work as a company. And a company like Saint-Gobain, we're in 87 countries around the world. I'm not sure that that's possible for us, so I don't see us doing that. But I guess I would argue, so in France, if you're a company of a certain size, you have to basically produce a corporate social responsibility report. And part of that report, so if you look at Saint-Gobain's annual report, it's 300 pages long, which is too large, but it is because of these non-financial reporting requirements. So you're required to report on environment, social governance issues because your shareholders need that information in order to be able to make a decision about whether, an informed decision as to whether they can invest in your company. They need to know about all the risk. So I would argue, I mean, to some extent, these requirements are requiring us to do a lot of the same things that a B Corp might be required to do. You know, 5% of our company is owned by BlackRock. So some of these same things that B Corps are being required to do, the financial community is making companies do anyway because it's good business, and they have a lot of data to back up the fact that it is good business. So no, I don't see us going that direction, but I think we're doing some of the same things anyway.
And I think you mentioned it. It's good business. It's not the right thing to do. It's also the smart thing to do.
Yes.
You know, we are in a lycée. Do you believe that the future graduates of the Lycée Français, and once they graduate from Ivy Leagues and they go on to work, are going to put that into perspective when they're going to choose which company they want to work for?
Yeah.
Or in other words, that B Corp or that social impact, does it become a criteria to be attractive?
Right. I mean, I feel it is. I mean, I mentioned to you why I work for Saint-Gobain. I mean, we have people that come to work for us because of what we say about the topic. I mean, we've advocated publicly for a price on carbon. You know, this is our business, as far as I'm concerned, is to solve these long-term challenges of society. I have people that come to me every day, and this is one thing I would say to the students in the room. I have people that come to me every day, and they want sustainability in their title. And often those people have more of an impact on that topic than I do in leading the function for North America. They might be at one of our plants, and they're responsible for reducing energy on a line or reducing water or waste or something like that. It's a matter of finding what the piece is that you have control over. Maybe it's procuring a material from TerraCycle that they've made from, which we've actually talked to them about, made from cigarette butts as a plastic that goes into one of your products. You know, you have to find that piece that's important to you, and every day I have more people coming to me asking me about this topic. So you have to compete in this area.
So basically, talent and investors are two key, two very big incentives for large corporations to actually, if not becoming B Corp, actually act like them.
So in a way, without telling people how many trash bags can come out of their household, that's the work that we're working on doing right now. So mandatory organics is something that we are pushing really hard on right now. We've, in our newest version of 1NYC, we've recommitted and committed again to zero waste to landfills, and that can't happen without organics. And organics is already available throughout the city, but in order for it to become mandatory, especially in buildings, is something that we're pushing really hard on. So that is one component of it. Of course, recycling is another component to reducing your waste, but also the work that we're doing right now on circular economy is meant to sort of allow us to zoom out a little bit more and think less about how we handle the waste in our households and design a way out of that problem. So it's not just about sort of what you buy. It should not be so inconvenient for you to sort of live your life in a way that's more sustainable. You shouldn't have to go to Brooklyn. You shouldn't have to go out of your way. It should be something that's readily available. And that's something that tends to fall back on producers. And the weight of that is felt heavily by consumers when we say, okay, you guys have to recycle, you guys have to compost, you guys have to work to fix this, but you didn't create the entirety of this problem, and there's a disproportionate weight of the responsibility that you're holding. That's why when we're talking about extended producer responsibility, which is also something New York City is pushing hard on right now, and we're working like very quickly to move this along, especially considering how quickly things tend to move at on a government level. But taking that responsibility and pushing it back up to the chain to the producer and saying, not just pay a fee for what you produce, but designing EPR legislation in such a way that doesn't just encourage companies to say, well, this is just the cost of doing business and it's more expensive now. We're going to keep doing things the way that we do them and it's just going to cost us. Instead, working with them to incentivize more innovative design, working with them to sort of address waste at the source. One of the images in the PowerPoint earlier made an excellent point. It was the one where it had the linear, the recycling, and the circular. Right now, the conversation heavily sits in the recycling, where, yeah, ideally, like if you're looking at any given product, we act like the holy grail of fixing the waste problem is to recycle. But even if you recycle, which a lot of people don't, it doesn't solve that there is still an end of life for that product that is completely unsustainable. And so that's why the focus right now on circular economy is so big and is so much bigger than just even asking somebody to recycle something, which, by the way, everybody should. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be recycling, but the push to look at things more circularly then more evenly distributes the responsibility of who's creating more of the problem, and then also allows the consumer on the other end to not just create less waste, but to live in a healthier ecosystem of sort of how those things work. So in so many ways, it's nearly impossible to tell households how to function, but to get to your point of asking people to reduce their waste significantly, we're asking of people what we can, and we're also asking of companies what we can. And that's sort of the lever that we have in producing policy, is pushing that back up the scale so that you and myself and everyone else in the room don't have to end up in a situation where we are so frustrated by how difficult it is to do the thing that we should be doing.
You know, as far as the tech sector goes, I mean, the largest procurers of renewable energy are the tech companies, so the Microsoft, the Googles, the Facebooks. So I think that they have done a lot to be able to reduce the impact of sort of the service side of things. You know, Apple's done a lot to, I would say, reduce the impact of its phone, but you could still buy computers that have the battery glued in that you can't take out. So I think that I think we have a long way to go.
Well, I'd like to thank you and to thank the panel, but before, I'd like to pay tribute to LFNY and Pascal for actually accomplishing another SDG goal tonight with our panel, which is perfectly gender equal. And gender equality is a very important thing for the future. So congratulations.
Thank you.
And thank you very much.